Greetings and salutations. So good to see you all again. I am Jay Gideon Winfrey, the host for season 5 of Sound Mind. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much for the support. And we just thank God for an opportunity to gather with you once again today. Today we have a great subject matter that we're going to talk about today. Today we're going to talk about rationalizing our irrationalities, how to move past irrational thoughts and behaviors, okay? But before we do that, because I want to make sure that what we do is progressive in nature, I want to make sure that you got your homework from the last episode. It's very important that everything we do here, remember, it's not about just conversation, it's about conversion. It's not about just conversation, it's about conversion, okay? So we want to make sure that we did our homework from the last episode when we talked about the 5 pillars of communication. Remember, the first one was listening. The second pillar was tone. The third was diction. The fourth was delivery, and the fifth was timing. Okay, we gave you some exercises that you can take into consideration on what to do and how to navigate through that. So if you don't have your homework, go back and do your homework to make sure that everything that we do is building and progressive so that we can have, again, not just conversation, but we can focus on conversion. Okay, that's the whole purpose of what we're doing is we want to be changed and not talk about change, but we actually want to experience the change to get to the higher ground that God has for us. Okay. All right. So now that we got the homework from last episode out the way, I'm really excited about today's episode because today we're talking about rationalizing our irrationalities. Okay, and how do we move past irrational thoughts and behaviors? Okay, so we're going to break this down into some real manageable dynamics here so that you can really understand what really is at the core of our irrational thoughts and behaviors. Okay, what's always important is that we come up with what I call the operational definition, meaning that when we say a word, we all know what it is that we're talking about. So when we talk about irrationalities in irrational thoughts and behaviors, basically in lay terms, and I'm going to make this really simple. When we talk about irrationalities, we're talking about things that just don't make any sense. You ever have thoughts and behaviors that when you look at it or when somebody brings it to your attention, it's like, it just doesn't make sense. It makes no sense why I think that way. It makes no sense why I move that way. But then sometimes we can get so used to function in irrationality that it becomes rational to us. And we want to definitely dispel those myths and we want to bring those walls down as far as our mental health and how to contribute to our rationality and not irrationality, okay? But there's some components here that I want to highlight when we talk about irrationalities. There seems to be a basis in what I've seen in my practice with those that I've worked with over my 25-year career, okay? The first aspect of irrationality is the irrationality of distrust, okay? And when we talk about distrust, here's how we define distrust, okay? And I want you to write this down because, again, it's not just about conversation, it's about conversion. And you only will get out of it what you put into it. Or as I like to tell my population that I work with, your treatment is only as impactful as your truth, okay? Your treatment is only as impactful as your truth, okay? All right, so with distrust, here's our definition of distrust. And pay attention because this is going to be key how we navigate through this in today's episode. So when we talk about distrust, we're talking about when an act has been done to you tangibly with evidence or the flesh. So when we talk about distrust, distrust is based on the origins of something that has actually been done to you. Okay? If somebody has taken something from you, if somebody has put their hands on you, um, somebody has somebody has been disloyal, and that it's something that has been done to you. So when we talk about distrust, we're talking about a tangible act that has evidence behind it, okay? That's what distrust is, okay? So if you find yourself being distrusting of someone, it comes from the basis of something that was done to you. So it's not imagined. I always tell those that I work with, what you feel is what you feel. It's not imagined. There's a reason why you feel it. We just have to get to the basis of, is it rational or irrational, okay? And the basis of that is it based on the occurrence of distrust, okay? So we think of distrust, we think about something tangibly that has happened to us Or as I like to say, it's the flesh component. Okay, it's the flesh because it's something that's evidence, something that was done to us. Okay, that's distrust. Okay, so that's one component of irrationality. So after this component of distrust, there's play, and that is the component of suspicion. Suspicion is different from distrust, and here's our definition of suspicion. Write this down. Okay, our definition of suspicion is such, where suspicion is unproven gathering of thoughts, observations that's based on our own deductions. Okay, so again, here's our definition of suspicion: unproven, watch that word, gathering of thoughts, observations based on our own deductions. So basically, suspicions is basically thought. Okay, now with suspicions, guess what? You could be wrong. You could be very wrong in your suspicions, because suspicions again are based on the unproven gathering of thoughts and observations. Like you can watch a coworker, and then something can happen where your boss says something to you about being late, and because of how you looked at that coworker, you'll be suspicious of them. You don't really have anything to evidence it, but it's just suspicion. You just kind of, because of something they said in a meeting, or because of how you watch them interact with somebody else, you just become suspicious. And the thing that we have to be mindful of with suspicions when it comes to irrationalities is that you could be wrong. You could be very wrong. My mother, Lord rest her soul, used to always say, ain't nothing worse than a person being wrong and loud. Okay? So you want to make sure, if you're going to be wrong, let's at least be quiet. Let's just be a little quieter when we're wrong, because you don't loud, because that's going to be extremely embarrassing to you. Okay? So that's when we talk about our suspicions. Remember, suspicions are it's unproven gathering of our thoughts, observations, and it's based on our deductions. Okay, so that's what makes suspicions different from distrust, because distrust is something that's proven. Okay, something that actually happened to you. You get pulled over by the police, and you get pulled out of your vehicle, and something unfortunately happens. You're not imagining that actually happened, so you may have a distrust uh, of law enforcement because of what happened to you. Suspicion is just your thoughts, it's your deductions. Sometimes we have suspicions in so many different ways. We can hear somebody else's experiences and we become suspicious of our own dynamics because of what somebody else may have said. And we see that a lot with social media. We see that a lot in the news culture that we're in, where somebody can share information and then we go home and then we take that conversation and we would have had that conversation with our spouse, our loved ones, about something that somebody else told us, because now we're operating in the irrationality of suspicion. Okay?
This is the story of a boy who is very sensitive to lights and sounds. So he built secret hiding places where nothing could get in. The boy didn't like looking people in the eye. It made him feel uncomfortable. One day, he found out he had something called autism. His family got him help, and slowly, he learned how to live with it better.
Early intervention can make a lifetime of difference. Learn the signs at autismspeaks.org.
So quick recap. Number one, the first irrationality is on distrust. Number two is suspicion. And we've gotten definitions for that. Those you've been given those definitions of that. But number three is paranoia. Okay? Paranoia hits on a whole different level. Okay, paranoia is defined as what I like to call it's the panicking of our flesh. Okay, paranoia is basically the panicking of our flesh. Okay, what does that look like? Here's what the panicking of our flesh looks like. If you look at suspicion is based more so on our thoughts. Okay, actions, that's suspicion. Paranoia is basically suspicions that are now manifested through our actions. Okay, suspicions can lead to paranoia, and you'll know it because now the paranoia has now come across as anxiety. Okay, and we're going to touch on anxiety in a couple of later episodes because I really want to debunk the myth of anxiety and what the difference between being anxious versus having anxiety, because there's a difference. But we're not going to touch on that today because we want to make sure that we feed you in dosages that you can absorb, but just to kind of plant that seed. So when we talk about paranoia, we're talking about basically when our suspicions manifest themselves in the flesh, where now we are experiencing a physical manifestation of our suspicions, and it may come out in how we treat people. Say if we avoid certain parts of town because of something that we heard, that's paranoia. Um, and paranoia can lead to some other mental health dynamics such as, obsessive compulsive disorders, generalized anxieties. Paranoias can really take on a whole different life of their own, which is why it's important to be able to recognize the irrationality of them. So that's why it's important for us to really be able to in put it all in perspective. So we got three dynamics regarding irrationality that we touched on. Remember, number one is distrust. Distrust is when an act has actually been done to you, that's tangible, it's evidenced, or what I call the flesh. Okay, I call it fleshly because you can put your hands when something has happened to cause you to be distrustful of someone. Okay, then we got suspicion. Suspicion is just the thoughts. You don't really have anything to substantiate. It's just your thinking. And a lot of times we can be wrong in our suspicions. But then that last one is paranoia. Paranoia is when our suspicions get the better of us and it causes us to function in a place of paranoia, meaning that we're acting on the behalf of our suspicions. Okay. So this will be a good time for you to think about, when I feel like I'm doing too much or I'm responding in a way that just doesn't seem to meet what's going on, which one of these am I operating in when it comes to my irrationalities? And remember, irrationalities is just a fancy word for saying us doing things that completely just make no sense to us whatsoever. Okay? So which one of these do we operate in? But here's the thing. You can operate in one capacity of irrationality for one dynamic and then operate in another one. Okay? You could be operating in the spirit of distrust because you may have experienced a sickness at the result of eating a certain food at a certain establishment. So you have a distrust of that establishment. But you can be completely for an establishment, but you can also have now a suspicion of other foods as a result. Say maybe your mom cooked something, or maybe your spouse cooked something, and now you have a suspicion because of what happened somewhere else. So what I'm saying to you is that one area of your life you can be experiencing distrust, but then another area you can really experience um, suspicion, and then paranoia in another area. So you can experience this in any different ways. So just do a self-assessment. Be honest with yourself. Think about the things that we go through and say, all right, when that happens, am I doing too much? Or just for people, ask the people that you love. Ask the people that you love. They'll be honest with you. Ask them, are you over the top? Are you doing the most when people come over? I don't want them to use my bathroom because I'm suspicious that they might, have something or whatever. So just really assess that, because irrationality knocks on the door of anxiety and anxiousness. It really does. So if we can deal with these and identify these on the front end, it can really stop us from experiencing anxiousness, but then also ultimately anxiety. And again, just planting the seed for future episodes. Anxiousness and anxiety are not the same thing. But again, we're going to touch on that in later episodes just to plant that seed. So In our irrationalities, we touched on these three areas. So I don't ever want to just bring up something to you and just give you the information without giving you a solution. Because again, we're not here for conversation only. We're here for conversion. So we're going to apply some tools that's going to lead to conversion. So you ask, okay, so how do I, now that I'm aware that I'm dealing with my own irrationalities, how do I fix it? Okay, how do we solve it? I'm glad you asked that question. And because I love you, I'm going to give you the answer. The answer to dealing with our irrationalities is discernment. Ah, that discernment word. We hear that a lot in church, but I don't think that we really understand the application of discernment and what that really looks like. And that's what we're going to talk about for this part of the episode is discernment. Now, again, in my practice, I do what's called psycho-spiritual integration, blending the sacred with the secular, using theology to influence psychology. That's just my platform that I stand on because I believe that all of God's answers for us in our mental health are in His Word. And we just utilize clinical modalities and interventions to be able to bring it out on this side as far as on the earthly realm. But I do truly believe it's in the spiritual realm that our healing takes place. We just have to pull it down.
Hey, let's check out this park. Oh, wow, that's really cool.
To find a great local park or forest near you, go to discovertheforest.org.
R. Kelly, is he muted or canceled for you?
I'm not canceling TP2.com because that's my joint. I'm not going to be able to do it.
Look, we're going to get all in there today. I'm going back to church. Are you ready to get in the house or are you ready to stay online?
I don't want to catch COVID. I'm ready, but I want to be safe.
Burnout in 2021, do you feel it?
I am going, not trying to get burnt out because I understand how it is. If you dodge there tomorrow, your job description is going to be on somebody's Indeed.
So when we talk about discernment, here's what discernment is per the definition that I like to give to my patients in my practice, okay? Discernment is, write this down, God-given wisdom that gives a peace and calm, making the unknown known, peacefully and wisely bringing our thoughts in order. It's also a God-infused awareness that brings peace and revelation and preparation, okay? Now I'm going to run it back so you can hear it again, because again, we hear that word discernment a lot of times in sermons and good word and good preaching, but we don't know how to apply it because we really don't know the definition, okay? So again, here's the definition of discernment, which is the key to moving past our irrationalities. Discernment is God-given, that's key, God-given wisdom that gives a peace and calm, making the unknown known, peacefully and wisely bringing our thoughts in order, and it's God-infused awareness that brings peace and revelation and preparation. So let's break that down into lay terms. Discernment basically is, how do I take God-given wisdom and bring about peace and calm in my life. Okay? In the manner in which we do that, the first thing is God given, which means we have to go seek. One of my favorite scriptures that I love to have my patients apply is when God tells us, "Be anxious for nothing, but through prayer and supplication, make our requests known to God." There's so much in that as far as a mental health perspective, because what God is saying is, first of all, don't get worked up about it. Through prayer, which is communication, through communication and letting Him know what it is that you need. Tell me what it is you need, and let's talk about it. So that's basically, when you bring that down from the heavenly places, basically that's discernment. Discernment is, let's work through whatever it is that we have going on in order to really figure out what's at the core of it. And you know when discernment is at work because you get a peace about it. You find out things that you didn't necessarily know before because you stop looking at the issue as an issue and you start looking at the issue as something for you to be able to overcome and grow through. Discernment can be used interchangeably with the word insight. When you get insight on something, when it becomes oh, well, this is what happens because of this in my life. Now, let me caution you on this. Your discernment is strongest within yourself, not necessarily outside of yourself. Because one of the things that I often see in my practice in therapy is that people seem to have a lot of discernment when it comes to other people, but don't really have it when it comes to themselves. And that's always something that I always want to make sure that we are just mindful of, is that if your gifts aren't maximizing your own awareness, it's going to be pretty hard to have credibility about it maximizing somebody else's. So sweep around your own porch first when it comes to discernment in that aspect. So we want to have self-discernment, because if we can trust the self-discernment, then the external discernment that we charge outward towards other people, it's going to be pretty reliable because we've self-checked in that capacity. Okay, so when we talk about discernment, the way that we apply that is we want to take distrust and suspicion and run it through the discernment process. Again, let's get insight into it. Why am I distrustful? Why am I suspicious? And let's get to the core of it. Not so much what has been done to me, but why have I reacted and responded in that way? That's key to being able to get to the core workings of discernment, is why do I react that way? And being able to answer that in a peaceful and calm place. That's how you know discernment is working. Also, distrust and suspicion is unsettling by default nature and design. So when you have distrust, suspicion, and paranoia, it's going to be uncomfortable. So don't let that discomfort discourage you from being able to apply the process of discernment. It's meant to be uncomfortable because of the very nature of what distrust, suspicion, and paranoia is based on. So that discomfort is not a bad thing if we manage that and we are able to utilize discernment and we address the dynamic in a way that promotes solutions versus recycling it. And we do that a lot of times with our rationalities. We recycle it and we apply it to areas that really it has nothing to do with. And so what's also important is that you understand that discernment pulls the truth out of distrust and suspicions. Discernment will pull the truth out of distrust and suspicion. So when you look at it for what it is and you start applying discernment, it's going to pull the truth out. You'll be able to figure out what's at the core, and then we can deal with that and get to the higher ground and for that place of peace and calm. And the more that you go through this process, the more peaceful it is, because you're getting that insight. You're getting the answers that you so desperately need. And then you start to realize that I can overcome this by utilizing discernment, which is God-given awareness. Okay. Now understand that discernment is the cure for distrust, suspicion, and paranoia. It is. That's the cure. It's applying it in that process, progressive model. That is how we're able to move forward when it comes to moving past our irrationalities. Okay. Now keep in mind also that when we are suspicious, it looks as if irrational thoughts and irrational behaviors get worse. Okay. So you got to understand that when we're starting to apply discernment, it's going to look like it's getting worse because you're actually exposing it. Okay. So don't panic. It has a very calming principle to it. But the more you face it and the more that you're honest and transparent, it's going to become more and more settling to you, more calm, because you're getting the answers to it is that whatever the causes are of your distrust and your suspicion, and your paranoia. Now, so the answer to ultimately moving past our irrationalities is the renewing of the mind and the prayer of discernment. I love in God's word when God gives us a commandment that really we're charged every day to renew our mind. And the renewing of the mind is basically every day we should be thinking of the things that are good and pure and righteous. Everything that's good is going on around us. Not saying that we don't pay attention to the negative things, because the negative things we got to deal with, the things that may be a challenge, we got to deal with that. And we're not running from that. But where we focus our thoughts is going to have a lot to do with our rationality versus our irrationalities. It's going to have a lot to do with it. So as we renew our mind, being intentional in our positive thoughts, being intentional in taking responsibility of our thoughts and our behaviors, being intentional in working through the matters and the dynamics of our mind and our heart and our spirit, that is ultimately how we're able to overcome and move past our irrationalities. Okay? All right. So your assignment for this week is to be able to self-examine, look at those areas that people say that, you're tripping about, you're doing the most, you're doing too much. Look at those and see, as far as your irrationalities, which area do these irrationalities seem to be birthed from? Is it distrust because of something that actually happened to you? Is it suspicion based on thoughts of what could happen, but it's not really founded? Or is it paranoia that has just really been thoughts and behaviors that have gotten such out of control that now you manifest such a belief in something happening that your overall mental health and behavior health is compromised? So look at those areas and then move through utilizing discernment. Look at those areas, take ownership of it, have conversations with your loved one, your spouse, your mate, classmates, people that really know you, and being able to look at what the core of that is. And even if that means, of course, utilizing a mental health professional, preferably, someone that has a spiritual background. I think it's always best personally. But there's so many mental health practitioners out here that are willing to help you discern through your irrationalities so that you can live the life that you want to live and live it wholly based upon what it is that the Father will have for us to do. So that's it for today's episode. You got your conversation, we got our conversion, we got our tools, you got your homework. And so I think you did good today. So I want to thank you for your attendance. Thank you for being here. Thank God for you. So glad that the Sound Mind and also the House of Hope and Hope TV. Thank you so much for what you do for this ministry. So we pray that God continue to bless you and keep you, and that he makes his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. That he will turn his love and smile and countenance towards you, and that he will give you shalom peace. May you have peace with God. May you have peace with yourself, and may you have peace with others. I'm Jay Gideon Winfrey, licensed therapist, and this has been another episode of Sound Mind. And remember, let your theology influence your psychology, because sound doctrine leads to a sound mind. Take care. We love you, and we'll do it again next week.
You had this epiphany based on what your grandmother had done. Saved money for 6 months, paid off debt, slept on the floor. And because of this conversion moment, you literally are sitting on the board of a bank that wouldn't have even given you a loan.
I was a pastor of a church. I was spending so much money dressing like a preacher, driving preacher cars. If I'm spirit-filled, the same Holy Ghost that makes me shout can make me wait until I can afford a BMW, and stop giving money, donating money to big banks, paying them 18% interest for the right to use their credit card to buy something I can't afford. It's a mentality.